Hello, everybody. You have once again reached DNF, the best F1 podcast on the internet, and the only one that has both Spencer Hall and Jessica Smetana. Jessica, you were ill last week. You are feeling better.
Yes. We unfortunately missed out, though, on the window to do a Spanish Grand Prix race review. So we're going to have a little, sampling platter of topics in today's show, I think.
Yes, and starting with we've play faked you again. This is an F1 podcast. We're going to talk about racing to start the show, but not the kind of racing you expect. No.
Ooh.
An F1 race might go 90 minutes to 2.5 hours. There was a time limit. There is also a time limit on this race that we are going to discuss, but it's far meatier and substantial. That would be Le Mans 24 hours at Le Mans race. One of my favorite races just in automotive sports, period, in motorsports, just because I love the way you watch a 24-hour race, and I love the way that you watch in particular Le Mans, because this year, typically you sort of nap. You kind of come in and out, right?
You kind of have to.
Yeah.
The drivers do too. So
yeah, the actual participants in the race are doing what you do at home, which is you pay attention, you don't pay attention. You come back, you see how things are going. But I love that it is long enough that wacky things happen no matter what you're trying to do. A driver had their foot run over in their garage.
It's not funny.
It's as long as nobody's seriously hurt. The driver finished the race.
It is shocking, which is why I laughed if you're watching this on video.
Yes. No. By the way, I say this as a fellow having foot run over person by car.
What?
That's happened. That happened in high school. Somebody just ran over my foot. Now,
no way.
I was unhurt. But you look at it and you go, did that just really happen to the car?
Who ran over your foot? Was this an enemy, a friend, or just a random person?
Rando in the parking lot. After school, a bunch of high schoolers trying to hightail it out of
mom?
That would be funnier. But no, it was just a random oh, dude, hey, sorry. And you're like, I think my foot's fine.
What kind of car was it?
When you're 16, you're like, yeah. I believe it was a minivan.
Wow. Insult to injury, really.
It didn't catch me full, right? But it did sort of, I was enough of a speed bump that I noticed it running over my foot. That's the kind of thing that sort of happens. At one point, at one team, the Garage 56 team, which we will discuss, had to take the car off the track and essentially rebuild the driveline. Part of the transmission had failed. They just had to rebuild it, but that's cool. You got 24 hours, man.
You got time. Nothing but time.
You got nothing but time. Go ahead, get out there. Pit crew members, take a nap. Around 3:30 in the morning your time, somebody's going to put a camera on you while you're drooling on your fire suit. That's part of Le Mans' grandeur.
I want to hear your take on the whole spectacle that was Garage 56. So what were your takeaways from all of that?
That it's the coolest. It's so cool. That Alanis King was tweeting. That's DNF guest Alanis King, and motorsports podcaster and author was tweeting that everybody was kept awake by the alarm clock that was the NASCAR Hendrick Motorsports 56 machine, a ZL1 Camaro modified to hell to hit top speed at this track. Not competing with Inspect, by the way. They were not competing for actual points, racing points, or anything else. They were just there as an exhibition. But if you saw it, it was hard not to fall in love with the big car, because every 4 seconds or so it would wake up everybody passing it with just the full-throated sound of American glory. Yeah, the car 56 was hard not to love, especially because every image of it you saw was the big car.
Yeah.
It was the big car. There were these little, sleek Le Mans cars, all within the race rules.
Right. All optimized to last long, to be fuel efficient, to not break down. And then this monstrosity.
Yes, and then a rolling refrigerator.
Monstrosity.
A brick on wheels. Just terrassing around one of motorsport's most legendary circuits with a guy named Jimmy behind the wheel. Not Antonio Giovinazzi, but Jimmy. Although it's funny to mention that one of the drivers in the 3-man team for Garage 56 was Jenson Button. And when Jenson Button drove this car for the first time, this was the description by Jimmy Johnson when he was asked how Jenson Button reacted. He said his eyes were so big He's like, how can it have so much power and so little grip?
My man has never driven on the road in Wisconsin in the winter before.
Flawless. So yes, a rousing success. A movement so powerful, by the way, that the announcers were doing the TikTok memes about the car on air during the race, as if people were making them on TikTok. They were watching them on their phones and then spitting them back out on air as they made them, being like saying like, "Hey, they've done this many kilometers, whatever those are," because that was the gag.
I love that. My favorite part of the coverage was LeBron doing the "Start Your Motors" in French with one of the worst French accents I've ever heard, and then
has the most wins of all outright.
Everyone roasting him on Twitter for him having just the most American sounding French accent. I respect the hell out of him for trying. Like all things, LeBron, nothing but respect, but it was very funny to listen to.
That's hard. That's like, I think if you had to do that in any language, it's difficult.
A Quebecois hockey player roasted my French accent like on the LeBatard Show a week ago. So like, this is glass windows or glass house, whatever the expression is. But
I mean, you know what? Don't see that. Just be like, yeah, but you have a Quebecois accent.
Right. Exactly. It's different. But French is hard, and that's why it's always funny.
There were two actual F1 notes out of this, F1 relevant notes at least. One was congratulations to Antonio Giovinazzi, who won for Ferrari.
The best lad, I think.
Exactly, like le meilleur homme. I'm not sure. My French is absolutely terrible. Roast away. But Antonio Giovinazzi, in his own words, hadn't been on podium since Spa 2016.
Wait, what were you trying to say?
The best man, I think is what I said.
Okay, I thought you were going for like Monsieur Le Maire, like from Les Mis.
That's how bad it was. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Somebody who did much better.
I love saying Le Mans.
Le Mans.
I drove past Le Mans once in France, and I was like, "Oh, there's Le Mans," and that was it.
It's not that. I mean, it's not that big, right? Like, it's not.
It's a little town. It's like in between Paris and like the Loire Valley, which is where they make a lot of the wine. Yeah. But when the race isn't going on, I'm not sure what is around. I'm not sure what's there.
So you're saying it's in the Talladega region of France.
Exactly. It's like a little bit in a no man's land.
Yeah.
No man's land.
No.
Fuck. Sorry.
No, that was good. Don't regret it. But Ferrari winning here is interesting for two reasons. Because one, this is Ferrari, as in Ferrari Motorsport. Managed by Ferrari, a team coming together to effectively pursue a goal and achieve said goal, which Ferrari did on an individual level. That's fascinating because Antonio Giovinazzi, who did have a Formula One seat at one point, then fell down and has not won any kind of race since 2016.
He did not good in Formula E. I believe he was the only driver to not score points in the year that he raced in Formula E.
Yeah, had a rough run. And for him to come back at this level and in this tier of racing and win, he cried. He was very emotional. Just a beautiful sight for Antonio Giovinazzi. Just a reminder, we sometimes say, hey, man, that guy was like P18. These are good drivers. And they're good drivers in pretty much anything, and it's good to see that after one driver did not make it, they found success somewhere else and genuinely seemed to appreciate it. The other thing that was an example on the team level, and that I think was an interesting thing to say, was this: that when Ferrari, when they were asked about this, when the quote was, "This victory that Antonello Coletta and the Amato Ferrari and the entire team, from our mechanics to drivers, have achieved in such challenging conditions because of the 24-hour duration, unpredictable weather, impressive strength of our competitors," this is the important part, "serves as an example for us all." That's John Elkann, the chairman of Ferrari. "Serves as an example to us all." Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, point, point. Leclerc, by the way, wants to race at Le Mans at one point in his career.
There's a bunch of F1 guys, not that many, but a bunch that have tried it, right? Like Fernando Alonso has raced in Le Mans at one point. I mean, he's what, 41? He's done a lot of stuff. Charles is young. I'm sure he'll get a crack at it at one point.
You don't want that. You don't want to crack at it too early. You don't want
you don't want to have to take a crack at it.
Yeah. You don't want it to be the only option you've got. Although that can turn out well, as we saw with Giovinazzi. Struggled in F1, but then brought home an emotional win in Le Mans. I love this race. I'm going to try to attend it next year.
Ooh, exciting.
It just seems like a great time. I've done the 24-hour at Daytona race, and if it's not 38 degrees there in Florida with the wind off the ocean cutting you in half, it can be very fun.
Le Spencer at Le Mans 2024.
Le Spencer at Le Mans. Perhaps we'll do a DNF.
Can we go back in time to when they used to do the Le Mans start and you had to like sprint to your car across the track? Because that's one of my like favorite sports things that we don't do because it's incredibly dangerous. But if you haven't seen it, do a little YouTube search. It's fun to watch.
That's a big category. It's cool things we don't do in motorsports anymore because it's crazily dangerous.
It's insane. It's just insane, and no one should do it. Yeah.
Refueling an F1 car mid-race. Yeah. Something that happened until really recently. Yeah. We also have some random business to cover. The F1 game dropped. I just wanted to say, hey man, listen, congrats to Yuki Tsunoda. Ended up getting the biggest bump from year to year in terms of his driver rating. He got an 83. If you think drivers and other athletes and other sports don't pay attention to these things, that's a lie. They all know their ratings and they all have beef about it. Max Verstappen somehow only a 94, which...
Are we grading on a curve? Like, who's the 100 then? Or is he just the highest and there's nothing above 94?
Yeah, this may be like a French grading scale where they were like, no one shall achieve perfection. There are no 100s.
There are no 100s. 94 is the best.
Yeah. So
interesting.
Congrats to Yuki on that. Yeah. Verstappen somehow went down a point after winning a title, which, that's a tough crowd, man. That's a tough crowd.
Do it in a Ferrari. It's a Stugotz method of blaming people for not achieving things that are out of their control.
Yeah. In another thing, I'm going to give you an option on this. I'm going to ask, do you want to take an option on a Shakira Lewis Hamilton story? Or do we bypass it?
I'm incredibly intrigued by it, although I did mention this at work on the Le Batard Show the other day, and I've heard that Shakira may also be dating Jimmy Butler, so I don't know. What do we make of this, Spencer?
Well, if she is dating Lewis Hamilton, good for him and good for her. I like people being happy. I would say this, Lewis Hamilton. Love. Both of you need to treat each other well. It's a mutual thing. If you're going to have a good relationship, both of it needs to be a 50-50 exchange. I would say this, Lewis, keep your nose clean and keep it very, very honest because remember, Shakira is a detective.
Yes.
Detective Shakira.
Shakira.
She will find out things.
Well, she may be the one dating Jimmy Butler. Now I need to get to the bottom of this. I don't know. We'll get an answer by next episode.
Let me give you this. My ideal outcome is that I hope she's dating both of them and is happier than she's ever been in her life.
Me too. I gotta love Shakira. But she has been spotted in multiple F1 garages, right? Like she was at the Miami race and then she was at the Spanish race.
Yes.
Am I right about that? I mean, yes. Where there's smoke, right?
Yes. I hope ideal outcome, Shakira dating both Lewis Hamilton and Jimmy Butler and is thrilled with the whole situation and everyone's cool with it.
And Fernando Alonso. Let's throw him in there because T-Swift rumors.
I'm on board with whatever makes Shakira happy, right? I would just say that also I hope that she doesn't mind bulldog slobber because that's part of the package with Lewis, That's true. And I know Lewis has got to have the nicest stuff in the world because he's a man of taste and wealth. Two things that don't always overlap, but he also has a bulldog, and I also know what that means, regardless of how nice the couch is. Slobber.
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, Spencer, we should probably talk about the next Formula One race on the calendar, which is this upcoming weekend in Montreal. This is a fun race. This was really fun last year. What happened last year?
Among other things, we had Yuki come straight out of the pit lane into the wall. So
and that's why he got a 6-point higher score on the F1 video
They saw
game.
that. They were just impressed with
They were
his
very
ball work.
impressed.
Yeah. This is also kind of a sneaky, chaotic track, is the way I like to put it, because we're not under any illusions that anyone but Max Verstappen is going to win in this car in this year.
Ever.
No matter what the race is. It would require a serious mechanical failure for him to not at least be in the top 2 at the end of the race, if not outright in the lead. However, everything back of 1 is intriguing because we have several different plot lines all converging at once. You have Mercedes coming off of continued improvement following their upgrades and their performance in the Spanish Grand Prix. You also have Aston Martin upgrades en route. And when those are deployed, Aston and Mercedes are going to be locked in a tight battle for that 2 slot. Right?
So, yes, probably the biggest thing that happened at the Spanish Grand Prix that we did not get to discuss because I was sick was that Mercedes looked really fast and Aston Martin lost their place in the Constructors' Cup to Mercedes. Like, Mercedes is now the second fastest car probably, but Aston Martin thinks that they will have solved some of their floor issues this weekend with the upgrade that they're getting. So now there may be a battle for second between these two teams because Mercedes, now they have side pods and everything is better.
Everything's better. It's all fixed.
They fixed it. They were like, let's put a little thing here and a little thing there and we're good.
It turns out, since I've now read Adrian Newey's book, How to Build a Car, that's all you need.
I read that too.
Oh my God, what a coincidence.
We should talk about it.
We should talk about it right after this.
Let's do that.
But we did not get to discuss that. We also didn't get to discuss Aston Martin having kind of a, day relative to their performance in 2023 at the Circuit de Catalunya. So they're looking to rebound as well. McLaren continuing to improve. Continuing to improve. This is, and that's of course intriguing enough to get McLaren fans being like, we're back, we never left. Like, McLaren fans are currently living out the meme, right? Like, we're back, it's so over, right? Oh, now we're back, baby. Like, now it's totally over. We never left. Like, they're living this out in real time. But there is I think real evidence, to show a trend of, continual improvement for the team. So are we saying that there's going to be a thrilling Canadian GP this weekend where number 1 is going to be up for grabs? Absolutely not.
No, but the midfield could be pretty good.
Yeah, midfield could be solid too. And we also get to see, I think, too, yes, Red Bull is the king. But Red Bull is not just Max Verstappen. And we get to see if Checo Perez can rebound to the kind of form that he had in the first couple of races in the season where he looked to be as much of a contender as Max Verstappen. All right, not as much as, but he's right there. I'm holding my fingers this
Very
far
close.
apart, podcast listeners. This close.
Right. Not 60 points behind.
Not 60 points.
5 points behind.
5 points.
Before Monaco.
10, yeah. A rival and not just a partner, right? We get to see if Checo Perez is going to be swallowed up by all of that chaos in the sort of 2 to 8 range, or whether he's going to be able to sort of float above it and finish 1-2 with Verstappen. We've done a good enough job selling everybody on the potential intrigue in the Canadian GP.
I think we have, and we will have another episode reviewing that next week. But for the rest of this episode, we did a fair amount of homework preparing for what is, I think, our inaugural book club episode of DNF. Mm-hmm. So, Spencer, you already mentioned it. We both read the book How to Build a Car by Adrian Newey, written in 2017. And I'm gonna be honest, for a book about engineering and car mechanics, pretty good. I was intrigued. I was invested. I finished the entire thing. How many pages was it? It was 500 pages.
Yeah, I mean, I read it. I read the digital edition. So by reading it on Kindle, it was 500 pages or so. I'm not sure what it actually is.
It's long. It was 80 chapters.
It is a fascinating book to me. I had to interrupt myself to perform the basic task of my day to finish them in order to say, okay, hey, I really just want to finish this thing because it's very interesting to me. Adrian Newey, if you don't know him, Adrian Newey is the chief technical officer at Red Bull Racing. He is a Formula One veteran and legend at this point. He is an engineer par excellence, somebody who, if I had to describe like his technical gift, he sees air. Like he sees, like he's one of these guys who, he reminds me of Kelly Johnson, the guy who designed the SR-71, the P-38 Lightning, and a bunch of other extremely fast planes for their time. He did it because people were like, I swear he can see air. Like
Interesting.
An aerodynamic genius, Adrian Newey.
Yeah, I think he has an interesting story in that I always admire people who, when they're like 8 years old, know exactly what they want to do for the rest of their life and are like, yeah, like I want to work in Formula One. I'm gonna design cars. And he kind of did. Like he kind of just knew exactly what he wanted, and then he like went and did it and became the best at it. I thought that one thing that was incredibly impressive about him was kind of his mentality and mindset about Formula One. Like he's worked through several eras of Formula One where someone has had a competitive advantage, and then every team tries to copy it, and then the FIA bans it, and then someone else finds one, and maybe it's him, and then someone else tries to copy it. Like he gets how the sport is. He gets how like the sausage is made. Like he wasn't like whining in the book about the suspension of, you know, the double diffuser, any of these like things that he invented, right? Like he just is like, yeah, okay, we can't do this anymore. Let's come up with something else. And that's been like the last 30 years of his career, which I find really interesting.
Also interesting in that he's a person who, one, kind of invented his own job.
Yeah.
You know, as an aerodynamicist, like as somebody who goes, well, I'm going to do all of the things. He's somebody who I think he wasn't a great student. In fact, at times he was a really...
He like said he got expelled from school, or one of his schools, right?
Right.
I feel like all smart people get expelled from school at one point.
Yes.
But not all people that get expelled from school are smart.
That's how the bubbles overlap. Like some people who get expelled from school just eventually go to jail. Like that does happen, you know. And we hope they get better.
Right.
But
if you're smart, you probably have been expelled from school. Yeah,
he got expelled from school when he cracked the windows at the church that was on campus. Yeah,
that'll happen.
By cranking up the sound on a massive stereo system because he was super into like progressive rock, right? So that happened. He also went to school.
Kind of weird guy.
Yeah, he went to school with Jeremy Clarkson, right?
Yeah.
Like in case his life wasn't already Top Gear enough. Like he's known Jeremy Clarkson for 50 plus years. Newey, like I was interested. Like, what were the things that you, as an F1 fan, you're reading this book, which is about this man, talking about his life and how inextricable it is from Formula One. What were the parts where you said, "Oh man, I didn't know that, and I am a smarter, more knowledgeable fan after reading this"?
Oh man, there's so much. Like it is a meaty book, and it's technical, but it's not like overly technical. Like you don't really need to be an engineer to like fully understand it. He explains things very simply, but I think honestly, as a Formula One fan, reading it and understanding the different eras of Formula One was the best part, because he's been around for, you know, he's worked in Formula One for pretty much most of the modern era of F1. Like he worked at Williams when active suspension was the big thing, that before it had gotten banned, I believe. And that was a major turning point F1. You mentioned already like aerodynamics, like that wasn't something that F1 engineers were really studying when he was coming up through school, which feels strange, right? Like, doesn't that seem like a thing that you just assume
or that
was happening? Yeah,
or that you would have a wind tunnel facility as part of the racing team, which was not the case. There were only so many wind tunnels.
There were two, apparently. And like one of the anecdotes from the book is that they were testing things in the wind tunnel, and then they were putting the car on the track, and they were like, something's not adding up. And instead of, you know, they were like trying to fix the car and all these things. And then he was like, maybe it's the wind tunnel. And sure enough, like something was wrong with the wind tunnel, because it wasn't, you know, it wasn't built to that team specifications, and et cetera, et cetera. So he was big into the development and like the perfection of that technology too, designing a new one. But I mean, I thought that him he's worked throughout several different eras and iterations of F1. And to still like want to work in F1 after all of that is fascinating to me. I thought so he designed the car that Ayrton Senna died in during the race at Imola in 1994. I thought that getting his perspective on that whole chapter of Formula One was really interesting. Didn't realize he was on trial for manslaughter 3 separate times in Italian courts for that. So that was really eye-opening as well. But then he moved to McLaren, which is another iconic F1 team. Ron Dennis seems like a weird guy. A lot of weird anecdotes about him. Loves the color gray. Used to rip the pant pockets off the back of people's pants, apparently.
Yeah, to celebrate.
Yeah, weird thing to do.
Yeah.
And then of course he went to Red Bull, which is like the, modern F1 team that started from almost nothing and now has won several championships because of him and his work. So I don't know. I thought like, for a guy that's not that old, he has like lived an F1 life.
Yeah. I enjoyed how much the book taught me about the present moment.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean, it's fascinating because by reading this book, it helped me understand how Mercedes could miss on their car so badly.
Yeah.
Because he talks about what it's like to miss on a car that tests well in the tunnel and that you only have X number of months to create. Then you put it on the track and it's not responding and it's not working. And ultimately, if you don't have it, also reading this book was fascinating because there is all the technical stuff in it, which is light touch. It's all very, very light touch, very deftly explained. It could be more technical, but it's not. And you kind of understand a good chunk of it. I'm not saying you're going to get all of it. There are some parts where your eyes glaze over and you're like, I don't know about the wind over that strut and I don't really care. But it was enough to make the experience of watching a race richer because you start to understand, oh, that's how they miss so badly on this. That's what this means when they talk about this. So that's all fascinating to me. But ultimately, like, the personal element of the narrative is fascinating because people still matter so much in this sport.
Yeah.
The cars are literally built around them. The instances of this are all over the place, talking about, well, we had to put this back there because this driver was so tall. Nigel Mansell, the great F1 90s legend, the British driver, talking about how they had to build the car extra wide for his ass because he had a very wide ass.
Hips don't lie.
Yeah, he had wide hips, so they had in order to pack like stacked ass Nigel Mansell in there and put his little thick self, they had to make it wider, and that affected everything. Just realizing how bespoke these cars are at every point for the driver, to the point where Adrian Newey, who is kind of a garagisti in the purest sense of the word, in that he really will just make the part because he knows how to do that. At one point, he makes a special gear shift for a driver overnight. He says that makes him like one of the few guys to ever make a part on his own car as an F1 designer. I love that kind of stuff. I love that the people still matter, that he's an engineer, so he had to figure out how it happened, but that personally, Senna's death, the only one in any car he'd ever designed, was devastating to him, to the point where he still doesn't like going to Imola. Yeah. And where he pays homage to the turn, and he goes to the spot every time he's there, but it still affects him personally. I loved his candor when talking about dealing with people and acknowledging that there are large personalities, but that these large personalities, they do things for the sport and for Newey at points, but that Newey also is the problem, that personally he acknowledges that he's selfish and super overcommitted to his work, which committed to the failure of 2 marriages. So that's, and of being, a crap husband and at times an absentee father. That's very much the kind of candor that you want in this kind of thing. And it also makes you realize that this is a sport where those personalities matter. Why did McLaren not work out? Well, it's probably because he and the dude at McLaren did not get along that well. Why did Williams Racing fail? Well, there's a front seat account of how that happened, because the Williams brothers do some very stupid and frankly egotistical things in that mistake themselves for the talent on the team.
Yeah, and there's like a ton of follow-up points to that. Credit to him for not making himself sound like awesome the whole time, because like, especially when you mentioned like his personal life, like he he was married, had 2 kids, they got divorced, and then he was married again, had 2 more kids, and then they got divorced. And like all throughout all of it was like, yeah, like home life was really hard. I'm traveling a lot and I barely see my family. Like it, you know, I was kind of a shitty husband. And I imagine that would be easy to omit from a autobiography or just to blame someone else on. But I also thought, like, when to your point about Mercedes failing on a car, he has a philosophy that I imagine each engineer has a little bit of a different kind of philosophy on, but his is that if he's going to decide to make something a certain way, he's going to, and he believes that it's because of a good reason. Like, he really believes in whatever thing he's making or changing. He's going to follow that until its bitter end if it doesn't work right away, because he believes he did it for the right reason. So if they've tweaked something and it doesn't work, instead of giving up and going back, if he thinks that his reasoning was sound in doing it, like, he will keep tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it until it works. And I think that is probably not the same for every team and every engineer. And of course, like, cost comes into effect. There's tons of pressure. All of the times that he had a car, there were a couple times he had cars that just didn't work. I'm sure there is immense pressure on the team, on the engineers, especially on the drivers, to figure it out, right? But, you know, you have to go back to the drawing board and keep working and trying, because to scrap it all and start from scratch is not the way that he wants to do it, right? So I thought that was interesting insight into just like his engineering philosophy. Yeah,
a guy who's won 13 titles. 13 constructors.
And he drove at Le Mans.
Newey's famous for crashing. That's actually like his thing.
He crashed a lot.
He crashed a lot, and
including in like street cars. Like, he got into like several car accidents randomly, including one outside of Daytona.
Disastrous ones too. Ones that could have ended his life. Famous for crashing motorcycles in the paddock when he came in. That happened as well. Once did donuts on Christian Horner's lawn after a couple of drinks at I believe a celebration party in someone else's new Ferrari California. That's the kind
did you catch the part where he said that the Porsche 911 is like just a shit car?
Okay. So he and I kind of agree on this. The Porsche 911 is a car that is designed to be very intolerant of mistakes. You know, I think Clarkson's line on it was, "It is a car that does not suffer fools, and I am a fool." And that preceded an episode of Top Gear where Clarkson crashed a new 911 into the barriers at the track. I kind of agree with him, because I don't think, I mean, the Porsche 911 is the car that if a celebrity is killed in a racing incident, a street racing incident, or a casual driving incident, that's my number one suspect. And I'm backed up, but it's the car that killed Paul Walker. They're hard to control.
Damn.
And I think Newey's great, like, his great objection to the 911 is that a car should be able, you should be able to control it, right? Like, it should be driver friendly.
That's fair.
Yeah. Because that's, it should be fast. And to me, that's why I've never kind of been big on him, because I was like, this thing, yes, it's for the ultimate driver. No, if you wanted to design a car that was for the ultimate driver, it would help the driver, not to the extent of taking you out of the equation, but like, I will say this as somebody who has driven some hypercars and supercars for fun and for work, and the best description I can give is this: if you drive a McLaren, which I've driven, he would adore a McLaren because you can point it. You can just point a McLaren and go, "We're going there," and it's almost like the car reads your mind. It is so precise and so clean at every turn, and that's not what a 911 is. So I get it.
Wow,
that's my,
confirmation. You and Adrian Newey, the most brilliant minds of our time. Obviously, Porsche 911s can suck one. So
yeah, there's going to be like some angry Porsche person in my next, like, you don't get it. No, I don't. I don't. Right? That's like when people are like, "Why don't you like Tom Brady?" You're like, "I just don't." He's really good at his job. Yeah,
so many reasons.
So,
well, we're united in that. I don't have a strong opinion on Porsche 911s, having never driven one, but the Tom Brady thing I can get behind. So
it's kind of like that. You're like,
he's the Tom Brady of cars. No, Tom Brady is the Porsche 911 of quarterbacks.
I could go with that. Yeah, highly esteemed. Certainly good at certain
finicky.
things. A little
stiff.
finicky, a little stiff. And also like ultimately it comes down to preference, right?
Yep.
Like we talk about, like in F1 we talk about all the time. You're like, okay, well, what is the best car? You're like, well, it's Max Verstappen. And they go, well, who's your favorite driver? You're like, well, it's not Verstappen. Obviously there's something else going on here. You're watching for a different reason, right?
Right.
Because otherwise we would just all be fans of Big Orange. We would just be like wearing Holland shirts and Red Bull stuff, and we would only be rooting for Verstappen. But it'd be a boring world if we did that. It would be a boring world if there weren't like oddball obsessives like Adrian Newey who take that and turn it into, consistent greatness. This book ends, by the way, in 2017 when Red Bull is getting housed by...
Oh, and he hates it. Like the end of the book, he's basically like, screw Mercedes, they suck. Like he almost takes like a little turn in everything he said until that point about like understanding the FIA and some of the things that they've done. He obviously does not come across as a fan of the FIA and their decision making, and explicitly calls out Max Mosley for like, keeping things good for Ferrari for so long to keep them in the sport. So that's like a little bit of candor. But yeah, at the end, he's just like, yeah, well, Mercedes, they should not be doing this and this. But then, of course, we know that like Mercedes' reign has now essentially ended in the 2021 season, and Red Bull is back at the top, and he is back at Red Bull after taking a little bit of like a break from the F1 team, I believe. So I did think that was a funny end for the book.
Yeah.
But I will also say, like, he joined Red Bull like kind of at the beginning and explained the origins and like the, I guess, philosophies behind the team, and it did make me really kind of have a new appreciation for Red Bull as a Formula One upstart, as kind of like the new flashy kids on the block that weren't taken seriously, that I haven't gotten into the sport in the last like 3 years, didn't really have before that. So I can't give him credit for that.
Yeah, it's a very, I think for those of you, if you're new to the sport, you should read this book anyway. It's breezy, it's easy. If the technical passages get a bit much for you, skip to the next page. It's fine. He keeps it moving. There's not a whole lot of stick to this. It's very flowy. But you should read it, if only to get a new respect for Red Bull, because they are complete upstart, brand new startup program. Dietrich Mateschitz deserves a lot of credit for that, because he is demanding from the jump about how good they're going to be. And maybe an underwritten portion of the story is, I would love to hear Christian Horner's angle on it, because Horner is also there from the start, and so much of his personality and his character is built into that team. You kind of get an idea of why they couldn't lose, because of the people involved. There was a great committed owner who was very demanding and obsessed with speed. There was a quirky but one-of-a-kind engineer who was the same, and then there was Christian Horner on top of it. Yeah. And then you do something like put Sebastian Vettel into the mix. You do think, you just end up with like nothing but extraordinary personalities committed to like creating high-end racing technology and then putting it on the track. It's a cool story. If you hate Red Bull, you'll at least be sympathetic to attacking this very difficult mission and progressing to a high level so very quickly. But I just want the appendix. I just want the updates for like the last 7 years, because the entire story got only more interesting from that point.
I think so too. Yeah,
because he entered like a fourth or a fifth renaissance, right? Like he's had 4 or 5 different periods of technical dominance, and we're currently in the middle of the latest one. Yeah,
I also like, if you're maybe not the biggest fan of reading things, there's enough silly stuff sprinkled in and Britishism sprinkled in that I think it makes it worthwhile. For example, he called the cheerleaders at the Indy 500 pom-pom girls at the start of the book, which I really appreciated. There's a lot of George Harrison content. Apparently Damon Hill was friends with George Harrison, and
George Harrison was a massive racing fan.
George Harrison would go to F1 races and hang out all the time, and Adrian Newey, I guess, had a long drunken conversation with him for like an hour one night before he died, but then was so drunk that he didn't remember any of it the next day, which I thought was unfortunate but kind of hilarious. He also, apparently George Harrison wrote a Formula One song and never released it because he didn't want to get sued, because like Bernie Ecclestone's name was like dropped in it, and like other racers. So I would like to hear the George Harrison F1 song.
I would.
I know it exists out there. no one's going to sue him now if the estate puts it out. Like, can we just hear the F1 song?
Drop the F1 track. That's what we want to hear.
But there's a lot of good stuff in there. He drove a scooter into the bay at Monaco while he was hammered once. There was an anecdote like towards the end where he was like at a party with some woman and woke up with like a traffic cone in his hotel that they then brought on their jet to the next race with them. Like, there's a lot of just silly. If you picture Adrian Newey, a 55-year-old bald British engineer,
looks like an engineer,
hammered, doing drunk things with Christian Horner, you will not be disappointed. There's plenty of good visuals there.
There's a lot of good gleeful drunken vehicle destruction. We're not saying drive drunk. No, these are under controlled circumstances because these are engineers.
Yeah,
they know what they're doing.
Oh, 100%. He's probably measuring out like the Jaeger bomb fluid ounces to the exact amount that will get him buzzed.
Yeah. By the way, I love that. I love his. This is the last note I have on this. I love his counts of Finnish drivers. That's how I know what he's talking about. It's like he'd go through these strategic things with Mika Hakkinen, who's one of my favorite drivers of all time.
Oh yeah.
Because I have a weakness for Finnish drivers anyway, and Mika is the king and is a rally god. But Mika, they would go through these detailed descriptions of how we're going to win and what the strategy might be. Get to the end, ask Mika, and he'd go, "Well, we're just gonna win. We're just gonna drive. That's all I'm gonna do is just drive."
Yep, I'm good. He'd just leave the meeting. He'd be like, "I've heard enough."
Yes, I've got it. I will drive. That's how we will win.
Well, my last note on the book was kind of the way it ended was a little bit of like an existential question about Formula One and like the direction that it started heading in towards making F1 cars to test technology that could be used by road cars and to kind of reflect the technology of road cars, which I think Adrian Newey kind of had a problem with to an extent. And I think is interesting because the current CEO of F1, Stefano Domenicali, has said recently that F1 will never go all electric. There's of course like an all electric like Formula E series already, but the cars right now are using regular gasoline and hope to be using like fully synthetic gasoline at one point, but they don't want to go fully electric. So there's like been some interesting arguments, and I think F1 wants to position itself as like a sustainable sports league that is doing things that advance technology that people actually use and not just like a plaything for very wealthy people.
Yeah, not just vroom. Right.
Right.
Like,
right. And it seems like this is obviously something that has been on the minds of F1 people for at least the last decade, maybe longer. So I'm wondering what you thought of his take on all of that and where that kind of leaves F1.
He's got one of, first of all, I kind of had an answer to one of those. The hybrid technology that was employed at Le Mans this weekend. I don't know if you heard what the engines sound like when they take off. It's kind of awesome because the low RPMs, the low gears are all electric. So you hear, and then at one point that gigantic V8 hits and takes over at full throttle because it's spun up and it goes, and it sounds like Dark Star from Top Gun Maverick, right? Like, it's the coolest sounding thing. And I'm like, if that's what F1 has to be for a while before they go full electric, I'm totally on board with that. It's an incredible noise. Like, it raised the hair on my arms when I heard it. So, like, that's fine. You know, you could even hear it over the roar of the Garage 56 Camaro ZL1. That's how impressive it was. But there's another note in there that I think was interesting, especially given Newey's role in history, that racing history and in racing tragedy, that he said that, you know, we really sort of have eliminated the gladiator element. And by that, I think he means that, you know, we've eliminated too much risk from Formula One. And that was a curious point to me from an engineering perspective, but I get it because, like it or not, one element that draws people to this is the notion of danger and that there is real risk out there. And I don't want to say that I'm immune to that. Like, I like the fact that people are traveling that quickly and with that kind of precision is compelling, but they're traveling that quickly because they're daring to do it. My favorite moment this season was Max Verstappen's qualifying lap at Monaco. And it was because he was hanging on by a thread. And because he had it at the edge. So, I mean, I get the concern. I don't think in the end, I will always side with safety because I don't want to watch someone die. I don't want to be party to that as a viewer, right? But the idea of it not being at the far edge of control, I get that, because that's where the thrill is for me. Like, the competition for me is less electric if they are not pressing it to the limit. And at the limit, that's where danger lives. That's where people lose control of cars. So, and I say this, by the way, also as a NASCAR fan who has largely seen the danger go out of the sport, and it's okay. It's fine. Like, it's I don't, the races for me, they've built those cars into tanks where, it is very, very difficult for somebody to get grievously injured because there's so much armor between you, the track, and the other elements surrounding the track, But I will also say this: the Indy 500 featured one of the most terrifying moments of like the past couple of years of racing, when that tire went flying, and I was like, I don't know where it's going to end up. Right. I don't know where it's going to end up. So like that, to me, I don't have a finish point on that. It was a compelling start for me in thinking about how I relate to the danger that is both so attractive and so repellent within this sport, and which still exists. It's still there.
I think it's impossible for the danger to ever be fully absent, but I also think that the way that the sport and the business of the sport is run now, they have way more of a vested interest in keeping drivers and spectators safe than they ever have. And so I'm with you. Whether if you are someone who thinks like they care too much about safety, I know those people exist. I'm not friends with any of them. I have bad news for you. Like, Rolex doesn't want one of the drivers to get hurt next to one of their giant advertisements at the track at Monaco. So I think that's definitely something that has been a positive, and something that certainly, if this book has, like, you could tell the story of F1, I think, through the eyes of Adrian Newey over the past 40 years. And that is certainly one major element of it that he talks a lot about. So
yeah,
that was good book club choice, Spencer.
Okay.
What's next?
Hey, listen, we'll line it up. We'll figure out what's next. Maybe even announce it ahead of time. Ooh, planning.
People can read with us.
Planning. We could pick a book. By the way, if you do want to suggest that, you can tweet at ADSBS. You can tweet at me. You can also tweet at Jessica. But I'll take the bother if you want me to.
You can tweet at me.
Okay, you can also tweet at
I
Jessica.
love book suggestions. I already read the Elvis Presley one, so maybe Spencer should read that if he hasn't yet. So send your book recommendations to me and Spencer on Twitter. I already read the McLaren one. So maybe, Spencer, if you haven't read that one, we can do that next. But I'm excited for the Canadian Grand Prix. We'll be back next week with a regular race review.
Yes, an actual regular race review on time.
Unless one of us gets sick again. No promises.
No, it's not happening. It's not happening. We have engineered this. We are Adrian Newey tight with our planning. We are going to make it. It will be absolutely stellar. And hopefully we'll have plenty of the good kind of chaos to talk about coming out of Montreal. Jessica, one last note. I have a personal note from one of the people at Le Mans who saw the size of NASCAR pit crew members, thought it'd be a good thing to close on, because the actual description given of them relative to European pit crews was, "Fuck me, they are monsters."
God bless America.